Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy not to be alone in this room today after the party yesterday. My name is Jacek Kunicki. I'm a software engineer and trainer at Software Mill. We are a company where we write code in Scala and in Java, but we also value full trust and transparency inside. So if you haven't visited our booth here yet, today is a perfect chance to do it, so you are welcome to come there. In the session today, I'm going to share some of my experiences from giving live coding sessions. So I want to start with saying that live coding is certainly not for everyone, because some people like to do live coding on stage in front of an audience like here. Some hate it, and this is understood. Some people also either like or dislike watching it. So the people have their favorite session types. For some of them, live coding is nice. For some of them, it isn't. So I'd say that if you would like to do a live coding session yourself, you should belong to the group who likes watching it and likes performing it. But this is not for everyone. This is, I would say, the next step or next stage in giving public talks. My first live coding session was in 2015. I think this was during a small meetup in Poznań, so the atmosphere was nice. I was looking for a picture from this event, but the only thing that I was able to find was this one. A couple of things have changed from 2015. One hasn't. Smiling still comes with an effort to me. And this is what I looked a day after my first live coding talk. Now, this is how I looked a few moments before. I already said that giving live coding talks is stressful. So the live coding talk I was giving was a hybrid one, which means that I had a couple of slides and then I had some code to write. This wasn't my first talk that I was giving, but this was the first live coding I was giving. And the first part, when I needed to show the slides, went perfectly fine. Then I went back to my computer. I wanted to start typing, and my hands started shaking. But trust me, they really did. I really wasn't able to type. The only thing I was able to do was using my single finger to find the single keys on my keyboard and write stuff. So this was a surprise for me. Fortunately, I was able to calm down, and then I proceeded with the live coding, and the rest of it went fine. This means that before you do a live coding session, you should really prepare well. So this is the first topic I want to cover today. First of all, before you do a live coding session yourself, you should be really well prepared. And of course, I don't need to explain you that if you want to give any kind of a talk, you should be prepared. But in case of live coding sessions, there are at least two important things that you should focus on. First one is preparing and making sure that the flow of your live coding talk is correct, so that people are going to be able to follow what you are talking, that what you are explaining is clear. And this means that after you write the code for the first time, of course it would be obvious for you, because you are writing it, you know what you are doing. But then it's really good to go through the code again, to talk to your screen, and as if you are explaining it to the people in the audience, because then you may find some flaws in the things that you are explaining. It may turn out that some of the things that are not in a logical order, that you should switch things around, you should paraphrase some things, say them in a different way, in order for people to understand it. And this is actually an iterative process, so this doesn't only happen before the first time you are giving this talk. It actually happens after every instance of the talk that you are giving, because in my live coding talks, it often happened that I changed the flow a couple of times, because either I noticed that something is not well understood, or people told me that something could be in a different order. So the flow and the way how you are explaining things is important. The other important thing is timing, because for sure you should be able to know pretty much how long your talk is going to take. The live coding talks are a bit trickier than, let's say, plain talks with slides, because you are doing a lot of things simultaneously. You are using the full power of your brain, because you need to talk, you need to think, and you need to type. So there are three things to do, and it usually takes more time than you expected. So it's really important before giving the live coding talk for the first time to write the code in front of, like, to talk to your screen or to the wall or whatever you prefer, and pretend as if you were explaining this to people. And so you not only try writing this down, because this is one thing, but you also need to incorporate the time for talking to people, because it still takes time. And then you multiply it by like 1.2, 1.5, depending on your experience, and this would probably the time that it actually takes during the actual talk, during a conference. So dry running, preparing is very important. You should also know your slides very well before you do a live coding session. Normally, if you give a talk that only has slides, you have this very useful feature of your presentation tool, which is called presenter display, which shows you the current slide, it shows you the preview, the next slide, and it shows you all the notes that you have written down. So in case you forget something, you have it written down. But in order for this to work, you need to have two displays. I have two displays here, like my computer and the one here, and actually one more here. But I'm not extending my main display with this one. This is actually the mirror of what I have in my screen here. And in order for the presenter display to work, you need to use your displays in a setup where the main one extends your desktop. So you see the notes, people don't see it. Of course, it doesn't make sense for you to see my speaker's notes, because there might be some fun stuff there. In a live coding session, when you are writing your code in your IDE on your computer, you need to see the code you are writing, and people need to see it in the screen. So mirroring is the only option. And mirroring doesn't give you the presenter display. So you really need to know what's going to happen when I click next, for example. Knowing your slides also means what you are going to show, how you are going to use your hands. So if I wanted to show something to you, for example, the right and the left side, if I stood like that, which of course I shouldn't be doing, because first of all, I need to maintain eye contact with you, and other than that, it's just impolite to show my back to you. But for the sake of this presentation, if I wanted to show you the right side of the slide and of the stage, I would raise my right hand. But if I turn around, my right hand becomes the left side of the stage for you. So this is tricky. And this is especially tricky, sorry for that, when you're explaining things like data flows, for example. This is a slide from my talk about reactive streams, where I'm showing how data is flowing from one part of the pipeline to the other one. And if I wanted to show you that the data flows from the left side of the screen to the right, but I'm standing with my face towards you, actually your left-hand side is my right-hand side. And I can tell you that the data is flowing from the left, which is actually my right, to the right of the screen, which is actually my left. So you need to remember about this, because otherwise people might be confused. So the first takeaway is preparing well, knowing what you are going to show, knowing how much time it's going to take, and knowing where your hands are in relation to what people see and what you see on your screens. Another important thing when explaining things to people is repetition. So normally when you write code, you probably know the dry principle, do not repeat yourself, which is important when writing code. But actually the opposite is important when you are explaining things to people. There is a rule of thumb that says that when you're explaining something to someone, you should tell them what you are going to explain, then you should explain it, and then you should say what you explained. And this might seem redundant, especially from the perspective of me or you as a speaker here, because I know what I'm explaining, so why should I repeat it 3 times, for example? But for people who are there in the audience and who hear the thing for the first time, I bet that most of you won't notice the redundancy if I said something for 3 times. And redundancy or repetition is also useful for people to be able to catch up when they lose their attention for a second. This is especially important in settings like here, where we are in a seminar room, where the chairs are very comfortable and it's easy to fall asleep. It happened to me a lot of times, especially when there was a party the night before. So then when someone wakes up, if they get into the point where you are repeating something, they might be able to catch up, even if they lost their attention. If not, they are lost. This is also important not only when talking, but also when writing code. So when you write the code in your IDE, you know the code by heart probably because you should be able to know it. But people don't. People see it for the first time, and when you show them their IDE, they don't know where to look. They don't know what's happening. So before you write a piece of code, you should say what you are going to write, how it fits in the entire code base, in the entire application that you are demoing. Then you should write it, of course, saying what you are doing. And then afterwards, you should summarize what you wrote, what it does, and how it fits. So repetition is good, and you are encouraged to violate the dry principle when doing live coding sessions. The next thing is legibility, which is the ability for people in the audience to read what you are showing. So this is an IDE in a live coding setting. If you don't see anything, this is expected, because this is what it shouldn't look like. So there are a couple of problems here. First of all, the font in the main editor is completely unreadable because it's too small on purpose. But there are also too many distractions. So there is not only the code that I would be showing if I gave this talk, but there is also some file tree, some Git history, some build tool settings. So from your perspective, if you came to a talk like this and you saw a screen like this one, probably you won't even know where to look. And even if you're familiar with this kind of IDE, you know where the main editor is and you look there. I wouldn't do it, because if I saw a screen like that, I would look in the Git history looking for some funny comments from the history. I would look for some funny file names in the file tree in the left. So there are really some interesting places to look at apart from the main editor. You can improve it by using a feature of some IDEs, for example, IntelliJ, which is called presentation mode. And it does a couple of nice things. First of all, it makes the font size big. And you can actually even adjust the font size in the presentation mode. So if you find it too small, you can make it even bigger. It also removes most of the distractions. So that if you see an editor like that, you already know where to look. The fonts are big. You more or less know where to focus. But there is still some problem with a setup like that. And this is the lightning. So and using a dark mode for live coding. I love dark modes in the IDEs, and I'm using it on a daily basis. So dark modes are great, and they are perfect for giving talks, even live coding talks, but online. Because if you give a live coding talk online, everyone is watching it on their own display, a high quality one. They have control of how the room is lit, so that there are no reflections and they can see everything. And it's nice to read because it's easy on your eyes. But in a setting like this, for example, the room here in a cinema where we have two strong lights lightening the screen, you can end up with something like that. And if you have the lights directly pointing at your IDE with the dark theme, this might become completely illegible. And this is not a made-up example, because actually there is an actual example from GeeCON from a couple of years ago where the speaker was using a dark mode in their talk. I think the lights in GeeCON used to be stronger, and they used to be directed even more directly in the screen, and you can't really see it. So it's really important that you don't use the dark mode and that you use the presentation mode, but I already talked about it. But use light modes, use the bright modes during live coding, because if you are giving it in a room like this, because you never know what kind of lighting conditions you are going to expect. So this is really important. And when it comes to legibility, you can't really go too big with the font size. So use the font sizes on slides, for example, as big as possible. Use font sizes as big as possible in your IDE. Of course, there is some compromise between the font size and legibility, breaking lines and stuff like that. But there isn't something like a too big font size for a talk. Another thing, and this is related to explaining to people what you are showing, is to avoiding boilerplate. So if you see a code like this, and if I told you that now I'm going to implement the Cassandra sync method, the question is whether you start looking at this method or whether actually you are going to start looking at the code everywhere else. Because this is some code, we are developers, this is interesting, we want to find out what it does. So I would bet this is not the most legible way. There is the light theme, so the bright theme, so this is nice, but you don't really know where to look at. But what would you say about this one? Like, which one is more readable? Actually, there is an intermediate step even, because I can tell you that, well, this code is not relevant for now, so I'm going to comment it out. But I bet you would still be reading this. Well, this is commented out, but it's still there. You are going to read it. How about this? So now I have hidden all the unnecessary stuff, and I can only focus on things that I'm actually doing. There is some boilerplate that I might need to show for a second. For example, the data model here, which gives you some data model for this. But once I show it, once I talk about it, and once I want to move on to another piece of the code, I can just fold it, and it's going to remain here. And the feature that I'm using here is regions in IntelliJ. You can see the region and end region comments, which lets you do some nice things like commented out blocks, but when you fold them, they have a name. So if I fold it, it's not only a comment, but it actually says what is there. So if I showed it once, you might remember that there is a data model there, but this is actually not relevant at the moment, and I can proceed. The same applies to other regions with some code that it's required, but it's not relevant. So you can name it, you can fold it, and then it doesn't distract the audience. Another feature that lets you avoid typing, which might or might not be desired, because sometimes, well, this is a live coding session, so you want to write code. But for example, it might happen that you have your talk, you give it at different conferences, and they have time slots of different length. And at some point, your talk might last 45 minutes, for example. At another conference, it needs to last 30 minutes. So then it's nice to have some tool that avoids you typing a lot, and this is called live templates. So for example, here I have a live template, which is called Cassandra session, and I can just expand it just by hitting Tab and Command-Shift Enter. And I have some code that I didn't need to write manually. This can be for two reasons. Either I want to spare time, or I just want, this is not so relevant that I want to type it manually. And those can be configured in the IDE under live templates. You can see that they can be grouped. So for example, I have my live template grouped by the talk I'm giving. You can disable and enable them so they don't interfere. And there's a couple of them. We can see the Cassandra session here, for example. There are a couple of options to it. So you put the code, you can enable formatting according to style. You can put some variables there so that it takes something from somewhere else. So this is really useful. And it's nice that you can disable and enable it by some category, like by the talk you are doing. You might also have noticed that there are some hints in green on a green background showing up at the bottom of the screen. And this is another plugin that might be mostly useful for the audience. And it's called Presentation Assistant, I think. Not to be confused with Key Promoter, which teaches you what keyboard shortcuts you can use. So once you click anything, it tells you that, hey, there is a shortcut for that. But the Presentation Assistant is for the audience, so it tells you what keyboard shortcuts I'm actually using, and this is a great way to learn something new. So this is about ways to avoid boilerplate in your code, to show only the relevant things so that people can follow. Another important rule of the thumb for explaining things is to only talk about one unknown at a time, only unveil one unknown at a time. So if you are introducing some new concept, describe it, and then introduce the new one. Don't introduce 5 new concepts at once, because people are going to get lost. They won't be able to follow. Now, in one of my other talks, I was talking about some security models that rely on security layers. So any security layer that you are using anywhere has holes in it. And if you align the layers, some of the holes might align and some might not. And the fewer holes align, the lower the probability is that some error is going to pass through. The outcome of this is that you should be using as many security layers as possible, not too many. So let's see what security layers you can use for when doing a live coding session. Oops. So fortunately, this is a screenshot, but this is something that you should really expect when you're doing any kind of talk. So you shouldn't rely on the internet connection for anything critical. And I saw a lot of talks, live coding talks, where people have their IDE set up, but they didn't run MVN or SBT or any build tool they are using to download the dependencies beforehand. And they ended up downloading hundreds of megabytes from the internet, relying on the very unstable internet connection during the conference. This has improved over years, but I would still say that anything that is critical for the flow of your talk should be offline. So you should be able to disconnect the internet completely, and this should still work in order to avoid situations like this. Another important thing is to have a backup that is really reliable. And by really reliable, I mean printed on paper, so that you have a physical sheet of paper that you can take, you can look at. It doesn't have a battery that can discharge. It doesn't have internet connections. So those are actual notes from the first live coding talk that I was giving. You can see, first of all, that they are printed in quite a big font size. So this is not something not a font size that you would typically use for reading. You need to remember that if you use those sheets of paper like this, they are lying next to you. I need to look at the screen. I need to look at you. I don't want to do something like that to see what I'm here. I want to pretend that I know what I'm talking about, but I can forget. So then just with a glance of my eye from here, I need to be able to see it. This is also why I'm using the highlights, so that I have the milestones of my talk highlighted. So by just giving a quick look to the sheets of paper, I can see where I am, what are the next parts. They are also numbered, so that I know when the talk is longer, I know what the order is. And of course, if you need to use them, people are going to notice that, because if I had 5 sheets of paper here and I needed to swap them, take the next one, you would certainly notice. But if this doesn't happen all of the time, like if it's 1 or 2 or 3 times during the entire talk, I think it doesn't bother. So it's really, you would notice it, but you won't think, oh my God, this guy is not prepared completely. Well, and this is really helpful. Why is this helpful? Because this is reliable. Another useful thing that you can do if you already have your hints or your notes on paper is to write timestamps next to them. And when you write timestamps, those are the expected timestamps when you should be at the given sheet of paper, for example. And this lets you track how you are performing in terms of time, whether you are going too fast or whether you are going too slow. Because if you knew that on page 3 you should be 20 minutes into the talk, and then you look at page 3 and you see that you are 40 minutes into the talk, this means that you need to speed up. And if you know it, people won't know it. If you know it, and if you have a safe way to speed up, this might help you. Another security measure is using techniques in your IDE or in your terminal anywhere that can help you revert to a working situation from a non-working one. So imagine you are writing a piece of code like that. I was just about to write the does not work method, but well, it doesn't work, as the name says. So of course, I might try to solve this problem when I'm here, but when you give a live coding session, especially for first couple of times, you are really tunneled. You see your code, you barely see the people in the audience, and you don't think logically. So there might be a trivial error that you won't notice. And sometimes someone from the helpful audience will tell you that, hey, there's a semicolon missing, hey, you misspelled the name or something, but sometimes they won't. And time here flies really slowly. So if I made a pause for just a second, for me it would be a century or infinity. And I don't want you to notice that. So I don't want to spend too much time trying to solve the problem. So if this just didn't work, I can use Git tags on my repository and have the tags beforehand, so that they are numbered, that they are ordered, and I can use them easily. So now I'm on the 01-start tag, and if I wanted to just even if I have a dirty working copy here, and I wanted to check out some version that I know it's working. Of course, you should triple check before your talk that the tags are actually a working state. You can use the -f flag, which will override any local changes that you have, and you can just check out this tag, and you have a working version here. So this is really helpful because if you are not able to solve the problem locally, you are able to move to the next working milestone. I spoke about using light themes, or the bright themes in your IDEs. This doesn't only apply to your IDE, it also applies to the terminal, for example. So remember, if you're going to use the terminal outside of your IDE, you also need to configure it correctly. So IntelliJ has this presentation mode. iTurn, the terminal I'm using, also has a useful feature, which is called profiles. And you can see that I have a couple of profiles predefined here. So I have the default profile that I'm using on a daily basis on a dark background, but then I have some presets for presentation on a dark background, on a bright background. So it's really 2 clicks to switch to a different one. You don't need to remember what font size you were using and how to switch to it manually. So please remember that in all the tools that you are using, you should have some kind of presentation mode and some kind of way to make it readable for people. No matter how many security measures you apply, things can still go wrong, and they will from time to time. It happened to me personally. This was at a large conference. I would say this was maybe not the peak of my career, but this one was one of them catchy titles and clickbaiting titles for my talks. So a lot of people came. The room was packed. People were sitting everywhere on the floor around me. And this was a live coding session. So I plugged everything in. I saw my talk here. I saw it here. But I didn't see it here, which is an issue because people were also not able to see it. So together with the organizers, we were trying to figure it out for like 15 minutes. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed. I was not sure what to do it. I was doing my best not to panic. I was wondering whether I could give this talk without the main display. But unfortunately, it included a lot of live coding, so it just wouldn't work. If this was a talk like that, where I only showed my IDE twice, and other than that, I'm just showing funny pictures and talking, this might be doable. Of course, your experience wouldn't be the same because I would need to describe that here is a this is fine meme and you don't see it, but I see it and this describes the situation. But it could be doable. With live coding, it was not doable because I wouldn't tell people that now I'm writing the Cassandra session method and now I'm typing, it's doing something. So we decided to drop this. Fortunately, there was an empty slot on the next day because one of the speakers didn't show up and I was put in that slot. But there weren't that many people, so I was not a total loser, but I lost a bit. I lost my great audience. So prepare for the unexpected because you never know what's going to happen. And the more security layers you have, the safer you are because the lower the probability is that everything is not going to work. So this was the live coding part. I also want to share a couple of hints related a bit to live coding, a bit to giving technical talks in general. For those of you who are not familiar with Polish movies, the guy in the left is the Uncle Good Advice. So I'm going to be the Uncle Good Advice for a couple of remaining minutes. My first advice would be for you to be honest when you are preparing your talks. And this means preparing honest abstracts. It very often happened to me that I saw a nice catchy title with some clickbaits, or just baits. And it encouraged me to go and see the talk. But the things that the speaker was showing were not what they actually announced before. So the abstract was lying. Either the abstract said that this would be like advanced technology X, but actually this was the basics, or it was the other way around. And of course, like submitting talks to conferences is a game because you need to catch people's attentions by giving catchy titles and catchy abstracts. So this is understandable, but on the other hand, you shouldn't lie to people who are going to see your talk, because they would be disappointed. Also, you need to remember that the audience is your friend. So remember that when you are giving a talk, and if you are standing here where I am, you are the person who was brave enough to be here, and the people don't hate you by default. So even if you make some mistakes standing here, I'm making a lot of mistakes. I probably made 10 already during this talk. The question is whether you notice that, because I notice them, but if I talk to people after my talk, they say that, well, everything was fine, it was smooth, it was perfect. I counted to 3 in my head now. For me, it was infinity. The question is whether you noticed this small pause. Maybe you didn't, maybe you did. So this is a technique for catching people's attentions, like if you were at school and the teacher stops talking, then everyone wakes up because something strange is happening. But you might notice it, you might not. Don't fear the audience. And one last thing that I want to talk about is checklists. So a way to make sure that everything is working before you start, and even long before the talk. So I have 3 checklists. First is for online talks, which were something very popular over the last 2 years. Now, fortunately, we can meet here in person, which is great. But some of you might still have an opportunity to give an online talk. So in online talk, the tricky part is the eye contact. Because now, when I'm here in front of you, it's really enough for me to look at the door at the very end on the room. And most of you would think that I'm looking at you, or at least I'm maintaining eye contact. It becomes trickier if I gave an online talk, and if I had this small green light that indicating that my camera is working, because then it even makes difference where I sit in relation to this camera here, because I'm very close to the camera. And I once took part in a webinar, and before the webinar, actually, I was adjusting the height of my laptop together with the guy who was interviewing me, and we were checking like where do I need to look so that he has an impression that I'm looking at him, and this is because of the distance. So this is important, and you should check it if you want people to have the impression that you are looking at them, and not that you are looking like on your keyboard or somewhere. It's also very obvious when you are so close to the camera, when you are doing something else than looking at people. Because if I looked at the camera here and I wanted to check my phone, everyone would notice. Now, if I wanted to check my phone, well, I don't have it, but if I had it here, you might be able to notice, or you might not. We already spoke about relying on network connections. Well, in an online talk, you need to rely on that, so you need to go as safe as possible. So if you have a possibility to use a wired connection, use it. Have an adapter for your computer that allows you to plug the network cable, because this is still safer. Well, the Wi-Fis are reliable, but the cable connection is still much more reliable. And also, if you are giving an online talk, you should disable any transfer-heavy apps that are running in the background, because you don't want any glitches. Yeah, I think this is self-explanatory, so nothing to add here. Another checklist is for the day before. So you arrive at the conference, you have your talk the next day. So what to do? Well, first of all, you should come to the room where you would be giving your talk, not like 15 minutes before your talk, but the day before, to see what the room looks like where you would be standing, where the audience would be, where the lights are, so basically what to expect. Some conferences have dedicated slots for speakers to test their equipment, so that you can come between talks, you can plug in, you can see if everything works. And there's a couple of things that you need to remember. For example, this is checking the resolution and seeing what it looks. And you really need to know how to use your computer. And I don't mean knowing Java or Scala or any other programming language, or knowing how to use your IDE. You need to know how to manage displays in your operating system. Because this is a tricky part. Actually, I had the trouble with this just before this talk, because the layout of the settings was updated in Mac OS X. not X, in macOS, and I had trouble finding how to mirror my display because I was used to the old layout. So even you are familiar with the operating system, double check that there were no updates that are changing something. So this came as a surprise for me. You need to also check the equipment. You need to check, for example, what the resolution of the main screen here is. Because here we have perfect conditions, like you can use a big resolution, this is fine. But I had a couple of talks where I ended up using 10,024 by 768. And then you need to adjust some things in your IDE. You might need to introduce line breaks, and you end up with your IDE here because you have the same resolution here. So you also must be prepared for the fact that you won't be using the resolution in your IDE that you are using on a daily basis, but this may shrink significantly, and you would lose the normal view, and you need to adjust quickly. I already talked about the font size, that you can't go too big, and you should check the fonts beforehand. The best way to check the fonts is to launch the IDE with your presentation mode, go to the very end of the room, and see if you can see it. If you can, that's perfect. If you can't, well, you need to adjust it. What happens if you can't adjust more than it's needed and people in the last rows still don't see it? Well, then if your talk is not very popular, there are not many people, you can encourage them to come closer so that they are able to see it. If your room is packed, well, you can't really do anything about it. So you can just encourage them to look, I don't know, closer and use more power to look. It's also useful to know what kind of audio hardware you have in the room and how it works. So I have this microport here. I know that there is a thing that I have in my pocket. Sometimes there is a switch that you need to toggle yourself. Sometimes the people in the room do it for you. But there are people from the crew here. At one talk I was giving, it happened that there was no crew in the room, which came as a surprise to me again. So I came to the room like 15 minutes before, so I thought that someone will come, but then the time of my presentation came, and there is still no one around. So I asked the people in the audience whether any of them is from the crew, but they said there was no one from the crew. So this was strange, but fortunately I knew what the microport looks like, so I took it, I toggled the button, and it worked. So I was lucky, because otherwise I would need to walk through the large venue trying to find someone from the audience, from the crew. I wrote them an email afterwards, and they were really shocked. They were really surprised that there was no one there, but well, that was it. So know the basics, not only of your hardware, but of your surroundings and what happens here. So we had the day before, and now we have 5 minutes before. So this is the day of your talk. You are already a bit stressed. The adrenaline is kicking off and stuff. So you come to the room, and what to do? Well, 5 minutes before, or even more minutes before, you should do some warm-up. And you should do 2 kinds of warm-up. First thing you need to warm up is caches. And it's not the caches in your CPU, it's the caches in your head. So if you are doing a live coding session, I think you should know the code by heart, and you should be able to type it without any accessories, no sheets of paper with the code printed out, no Git tags. You should be able to just go and write it. And to be able to do it, what I do is directly before the talk, it's maybe not 5 minutes, but 15. I'm sitting with my laptop somewhere and trying to type it from memory, so that I know what I'm typing, and then when I stand in front of you, the stress kicks in. Then I still know what to do. I might need some help from the things I brought, the Git tags, but at least in a non-stressful situation, I know what I'm doing. The other thing is you need to warm up is your vocal apparatus, so your mouth, the muscles everywhere here. Because as you warm up before performing any sport activities, your vocal apparatus is still a group of muscles that you need to warm up. So it's best to talk to someone. And this is especially important when you are giving a talk not in your native language, because if you are Polish and if you gave talk in Polish, it's enough to talk to people around in the venue. But if you are talking in English and you don't use English on a daily basis, for example, when communicating with your client or anything like that, you also need to like warm up and fill the caches of the English vocabulary that it would be using so that your talk goes smoothly. Because in Polish it's easier. In a foreign language, it might not be that easy. So warm up. And there are two things that you should disable right before your talk. First of them are notifications. So what I'm doing here, I'm just enabling the global do not disturb mode in my system so that nothing pops up, so that nothing, my phone doesn't ring, it's paired with the computer, so anything. Those should be disabled. The other thing that it's nice to disable are any of those applications that reduce the amount of blue light coming from your screen. It can be Flux, it can be Night Shift that is built in macOS, because they might interfere with what your talk looks like in the screen. So you have a lot of hardware on the way. You have your computer, you have the adapter, you have the recording stuff. And if everything on the way adjusts the screens somehow, it may break things up. So disable this stuff and just like give a pure untouched picture to the projector. To summarize, there's a couple of things, of takeaways that I would like you to remember after this talk. First, come prepared. Know what you are presenting. In a live coding talk, you won't have the presenter display. You won't have your notes that you put there, so you need to know what the flow of your talk is. You know what comes next in your slides. You need to know what you are showing. You should violate the dry principle, unlike in daily programming. You should repeat things that you are explaining to people because it lets people understand. This is obvious for you and might not feel natural for you to repeat something 3 times, but it's really helpful for the people over there. You need to be legible, and this comes in various flavors. You should use bright or light themes in your IDE, in your terminal. You should use things that remove distractions, like presentation mode, like, for example, the regions or for example, the live templates that let you introduce only the important stuff and hide away the not important things that would like distract people there. And remember that you can't go too big with the font size. You need to include as many safety measures as possible, because the more security layers you have, the safer you are. So I mentioned a couple of them. It's your choice what you are using, what not, but think about it. You need to be honest while preparing your talks so that you don't lie to people in the abstract, because then, well, they would come to your talk, you would have this picture of the fully packed room, but then half of the people would go out disappointed, and that's not what you want. I would rather have less people and so that they are satisfied with the talk and not have a full room, and that 50% would say, well, he was lying, he didn't say what he promised to say. And you shouldn't fear the audience. So the audience is your friend. At least I think that you are my friends here. They wish good to you. You had the courage to be here. They won't notice the mistakes. Even if you make mistakes, if they notice them, if it's not too many of them, this isn't really a problem. And you are the only person as the speaker who would notice it. So that's all I had for today. Now I'm going to switch back to Slido if there are any questions. So I'm already thanking you for your attention for the first time, but I'm going to do it once again. So I should answer them from top, right? Did you check if it works fine in this room before your talk? Yes, I did. I was here at 8:35 or something like that. I plugged everything in. As I said, I had an issue with mirroring my displays because I was surprised by the configuration layout that has changed in macOS. But thanks to the fact that I came here earlier, I was able to solve it. Other than that, everything worked. So there was an issue just before because I had something else on this display here, which is for me, than on my main screen, but I still had some time, so we figured it out. Going against your advice, how would you go about preparing a talk that relies on the cloud? E.g., you want to present a cloud technology through a live demo. Well, of course, this is a scenario where you need the network connection. So first of all, I would check the conference network beforehand, because if you can rely it or not. I would go for a backup connection, so I could bring my own. But this depends on the type of building, because here we are a cinema. There is a lot of metal everywhere, and if I don't know what the reception here is, but it might be poor. So I would still have a backup with some recordings. So you can do a screencast and prepare it and have it like, of course, it's much better to demo things live, because then people see how it's happening. You have your speaking perfectly synchronized with what is happening on the screen. But I would bring a backup with just a video or a couple of videos that I would be able to play if something didn't work. Because, like as I said, the conference networks and the network connections in general have improved over the years, but they still can fail for some reason. So it's not that bad to rely on this, but have a backup for that. Yeah, so this is a bit related. So is it a good idea to record a video of live coding as a backup and replay it during the talk in case the IDE fails completely? Well, yes, it is a good idea. As I said, it's good to have any backups that can help you in any way. Of course, again, this wouldn't be the same impression, the same feeling for you in the audience. This is similar to the example I gave where when it turned out that the main screen is not working. Well, I could give the talk without the main screen, but I would need to adjust it a bit. This would also be different because you might have something else in the recording. You don't have the flexibility, so if people ask questions, well, you can only pause the video and tell them, well, in this case, I would do it to answer your question. So it's not 100% the same feeling and the same impression for people in the audience, but it's still good. It's better than nothing, of course. So yeah, have as many backups as possible. Have you ever forgot some basic vocabulary in English because of stress? What did you do? I did, of course. The most tricky part is when you start talking. So like the first couple of sentences that you need to say, this is really tricky. So if you don't feel comfortable, if you feel more stressed than usually, my advice, and this is not only my advice because this is an advice I heard a lot of times when like watching videos or reading about giving public speeches, this is to learn a couple of first sentences by heart. So even if someone wakes you up at night, you should know the first 3 sentences, for example, because this, no matter how much warm up you do before, how much things you put in your English vocabulary cache in your head, you might forget something because it's easy before you start talking. Like the people are gathering here, you are here, it's fine, you make funny pictures with the organizers, but then the time comes and you need to start talking, and sometimes it's like what should I say? So learn it by heart. I'm still learning the couple of first sentences by heart, so I sit like the day before or a couple of minutes before, and I just prepare what I'm going to say. And this really works. And then if you overcome the initial stress, it's really much easier. So if you get in the flow of your talk, and this really takes like those first couple of sentences, and then it should be fine. Okay, looks like we're done with the questions. So thanks again. It was really nice to have you here. If you have anything else to ask, you can catch me afterwards. I will be at Software News booth as well. So enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you.